Something strange is happening in the world, and as technology advances at a speed never before seen in the history of human civilization while nations shift alliances, economies tremble under uncertain pressures, and information travels instantly across the entire planet, many people begin to feel the same quiet and unsettling question rising slowly in the back of their minds as they observe these changes unfolding around them. Have we been here before? Thousands of years ago, long before satellites circled the Earth, before artificial intelligence began processing human decisions, and before global markets connected billions of people into a single financial network, ancient writers recorded descriptions of a future world that would look eerily familiar to ours, describing a time of global tension, moral confusion, rapid transformation, and systems of influence and control that would stretch across nations and continents in ways that their own societies could barely imagine. The question, however, is not whether these ancient texts exist or whether historians can verify their presence in the historical record, but rather why these writings, preserved for centuries within sacred manuscripts and historical traditions, appear to describe with unsettling clarity the very kind of world that many observers believe humanity may now be living in. Long before the rise of modern civilization and centuries before industrial revolutions reshaped the structure of societies, the pages of scripture recorded patterns about the rise and fall of powerful empires, the psychological and moral behavior of societies approaching their most unstable phases, and the emotional state of humanity during periods when history appears to move toward profound turning points that reshape the direction of entire civilizations. And what those ancient writers described within these texts was not comforting or optimistic in tone, but rather deeply unsettling for those who attempt to compare those descriptions with the present moment. In the Gospel of Matthew, within a passage often referred to as the Olivet Discourse, Jesus describes a period of history marked by widespread deception, global conflict, and rising fear among nations, speaking not of a single war that might dominate headlines for a generation, but of wars and rumors of wars appearing across different regions, along with earthquakes, famines, and disturbances emerging simultaneously in different parts of the world. For centuries, readers believed that these words were simply reflections of the chaos that often defined the ancient world, a time when regional conflicts and natural disasters were common elements of daily life for many civilizations. Yet something about these descriptions begins to feel different when they are read in the context of the modern era. For most of human history, events that occurred in one region of the world remained largely contained within that region, as news traveled slowly across distances, and societies often existed in relative isolation from one another. But today, the entire planet reacts to the same events in real time, creating a shared global awareness that has never existed before in human history. A conflict in one nation can send economic shockwaves through markets on the other side of the world. A virus discovered in a single city can develop into a global crisis within a matter of weeks. And political tensions in one region can ripple through alliances and institutions that span continents. For the first time since the emergence of organized civilization, humanity now operates inside a single interconnected system that links communication, economics, politics, and information into a unified global structure. And that detail becomes extremely important when examining the descriptions found within ancient scripture, because the biblical writers repeatedly described a future world in which power, influence, and authority could extend across all nations simultaneously rather than remaining confined to regional empires or isolated kingdoms. In the book of Revelation, written nearly 2,000 years ago during the era of the Roman Empire, the author describes a period in which participation in economic activity itself could become restricted, presenting a scenario where buying and selling might depend upon some form of authorization connected to a system that influences the entire global marketplace. For centuries, readers struggled to understand how such a scenario could possibly exist in practical terms, since the logistical ability to monitor trade and commerce across the entire planet seemed far beyond the capabilities of any government or authority in the ancient world. How could any centralized power monitor economic activity occurring across distant nations and continents? How could access to buying and selling ever be universally controlled in a world where most societies were separated by vast distances and limited communication? For generations, the concept appeared impossible, until the modern era began to change those assumptions. Today, digital payment systems track financial transactions instantly across international borders. Governments around the world openly discuss the implementation of national and global digital currencies. Biometric identification systems continue expanding across multiple countries, An artificial intelligence now processes massive streams of global data that would have been unimaginable even a few decades ago. The technological infrastructure capable of supporting a unified economic monitoring system no longer belongs to the realm of speculative fiction or distant theoretical possibility. It already exists within the framework of modern civilization. And yet, the warnings contained within Scripture were never focused solely on technological developments or systems of control. They were focused on the deeper patterns of human behavior. The Apostle Paul wrote in a letter known today as 2 Timothy that during what he described as the last days, societies would experience a profound shift in values and priorities, explaining that people would increasingly become lovers of themselves, lovers of money, proud, ungrateful, and lacking self-control. At first glance, this description appears to function as a simple moral critique directed toward cultural behavior, but a closer reading reveals something more complex. It is actually a psychological portrait of a society driven by consumption, status, personal recognition, and the pursuit of immediate gratification, describing a cultural environment where information spreads faster than wisdom and influence often becomes more powerful than truth itself. And when that description is compared to the conditions of the modern digital age, many observers notice an unsettling resemblance. Today, entire global industries revolve around capturing human attention and sustaining engagement through constant streams of information, while social platforms measure success through visibility, reactions, and audience influence rather than depth of understanding. Outrage spreads across networks faster than careful reflection, and competing narratives constantly battled for dominance in a global arena of communication where perception can sometimes shape reality. As technological systems become more powerful and more integrated into daily life, the human mind itself increasingly becomes the central battlefield where influence, persuasion, and belief are contested. But the ancient writers did not limit their observations to cultural psychology alone. They also spoke extensively about the behavior of nations and empires. In the book of Daniel, written during the era when the ancient Babylonian Empire dominated much of the known world, a series of symbolic visions describes the rise and fall of successive global empires that would shape the course of history: Babylon, Persia, Greece, Rome. Each empire rising to extraordinary power, dominating the world stage for a period of time, and eventually collapsing under the pressure of internal weakness or external forces. For historians and scholars of ancient texts, this sequence remains remarkable because centuries after Daniel recorded these visions, those exact empires emerged in precisely that order within the historical timeline. But the vision recorded in Daniel did not end with the fall of Rome. Instead, it described a final phase of global power that would differ from all previous empires, presenting a system formed not by a single dominant kingdom but by alliances of nations cooperating and competing simultaneously. Strong in some areas, fragile in others, a structure held together through agreements and shared interests, yet never fully unified into a single stable authority. When observers examine the geopolitical landscape of the modern world, they see a structure that reflects many of those characteristics. Dozens of powerful nations connected through economic treaties, military alliances, global organizations, and financial systems that bind their interests together while still preserving independent agendas. Cooperation mixed with rivalry, unity mixed with instability, a world that appears both connected and divided at the same time. Exactly the type of structure Daniel described in symbolic form centuries ago. Yet perhaps the most unsettling pattern found within Scripture does not involve technology, political alliances, or economic systems. It involves human awareness. Again and again, the biblical narrative presents civilizations approaching moments of dramatic collapse while their populations continue to believe that everything is functioning normally. In the book of Genesis, the story of Noah describes a society continuing with everyday life, building homes, trading goods, celebrating events, and pursuing ordinary routines, completely unaware that disaster was approaching. In the Gospel of Luke, Jesus later echoed this same concept by describing people eating, drinking, marrying, buying, and selling, continuing their daily lives without recognizing the scale of the changes approaching their world. The warning contained in these passages was never about predicting exact dates or decoding hidden mathematical timelines. The warning was about awareness. History often appears stable and predictable while it moves slowly through long periods of relative calm, until suddenly it doesn't. Empires that appear permanent can collapse within a single generation. Civilizations that believe their institutions are stable can watch those systems fracture under unexpected pressure. The ancient writers understood something that many modern societies sometimes forget. Human systems are fragile. Power structures shift. Technologies evolve. But the underlying patterns of human nature remain remarkably consistent across centuries. Ambition, fear, greed, hope. The same forces that shaped ancient empires thousands of years ago continue to shape the behavior of modern nations today. And when those timeless human forces begin interacting with technological power that operates on a global scale, the consequences can reach across the entire planet. So what exactly were the biblical writers attempting to communicate through these texts? Not merely predictions about distant future events, but patterns. Patterns describing the behavior of civilizations approaching moments of transition and instability, increasing geopolitical tension, concentration of influence and authority, moral uncertainty within societies, rapid technological advancement, and a level of global interconnectedness never previously experienced in human history. Every one of those conditions exists in the world today. But there is another dimension of the biblical narrative that is often overlooked. Hope. Because the story recorded in Scripture does not ultimately end with collapse or chaos. It concludes with the idea of transformation. After the rise and fall of empires, after periods of conflict, deception, and turmoil, the texts describe the possibility of restoration, renewal, and the correction of the disorder that has repeatedly defined human history. Whether these passages are interpreted spiritually, symbolically, historically, or prophetically, the message they contain remains consistent. History is not entirely random. It follows recognizable patterns, and sometimes those patterns reveal signals embedded within ancient words that waited centuries for a generation capable of recognizing their meaning. So the real question is not whether these writings exist, because they have existed for thousands of years and have been preserved across cultures, languages, and civilizations. The real question is this: why do these ancient descriptions feel so relevant to the present moment? Why do words written in a world without electricity, computers, or global communication appear to mirror the psychological, political, and technological conditions of the modern age? Is it coincidence? Is it pattern recognition? Or could it be something more? For generations, many people treated these texts as distant historical documents or symbolic literature disconnected from contemporary life. But in recent years, an increasing number of readers have begun examining them again, not as relics of ancient belief systems, but as warnings, and perhaps even signals. Signals about the nature of power and authority. Signals about the behavior of societies during periods of instability. Signals about the delicate balance that holds civilizations together, and signals about what may happen when that balance finally begins to break. Because if the patterns described within Scripture reflect real tendencies in human history, then the events unfolding in the modern world may not simply represent random change. They may represent the continuation of a much larger historical trajectory. And if that possibility is true, then the most important question is no longer what these ancient texts say. The most important question is whether anyone is still paying attention, because throughout history the most important signals have rarely been hidden. They were often visible to anyone willing to look, but many people chose to ignore them until it was too late. And if the warnings written thousands of years ago are beginning to align with the world that surrounds us today, then this moment may represent more than a coincidence of history. This may be the signal.